everybody. Welcome to this week's episode of The Full Spectrum. I'm your host, Bill Simonera. Like always, we encourage you to leave your comments. We'll definitely respond to them and, hopefully start a discussion. I'm joined tonight by Ramsey Hasbin and Chad McVeigh. We have kind of a different show this week because this week we have two people on the left with the Democratic Party, and we're going to discuss the party in detail tonight. So we're recording this on Tuesday, and the polls haven't closed in the Kansas special election. So we'll be interested to see where that turns out. We'll get a good bellwether on where things stand politically right now. Getting started, I just wanted to get both of your takes on the state of the Democratic Party and, where we go forward from here. So, Chad, let me start with you. What do you think as far as that goes?
Yeah. To borrow a line from John McCain, I think the fundamentals of the party are strong. I think some of us, myself included, sort of underestimated sort of the reservoir of hatred out there for Hillary Clinton. I think had we had a different candidate, maybe Joe Biden, whoever, I think we probably would have seen a different outcome in some of the industrial Midwest. So, while we're probably at our lowest point we've been in, certainly in a generation or more, as far as number of elected officials go, I think we're pretty well poised for a comeback.
Absolutely, I agree, especially with Trumpism in full swing and the excitement it's causing among the Democratic base. Ramsey, what do you think?
Well, I think one place where I'll probably differ from the two of you is I had kind of felt for a while that the Democratic Party wasn't really representing, sort of what I thought was right. There were certain issues that I think the Democratic Party were on the right side of. A lot of issues, relative to the Republican Party. I think that I can say. That's why I always have voted Democrat. But I also felt that there were certain issues that the Democratic Party wasn't really concerned about. I think the basically, and honestly, it's not that the Republicans were concerned about it either. So, I don't think the Democrats were necessarily the worst ones in this whole situation. But in general, I thought they were kind of losing sight of unemployment, underemployment, the fact that Obamacare wasn't really working that well in certain situations. I think they promised a lot with Obamacare, more than they could have possibly delivered. I think sensible people who are watching the situation realized that, but they kind of ignored it after it was done. Once it was done and they passed Obamacare, there was a little discussion about what was wrong with it from the Democratic side. And that was a bit perplexing because it seemed pretty obvious to me that there was issues. And ultimately, like I said, I don't agree with what the Republican Party's stance on a lot of those things were, but I also kind of recognize that people were not willing to just ignore those issues. And I think the Democratic Party kind of missed that as a whole. So I think where the Democratic Party stands today is, I think they're realizing that. I think they're realizing that they missed a lot of stuff that was really important to a lot of people who traditionally voted Democratic. I think some of that was related to sort of demographic shifts in the party, in the sense that I think a lot of those white middle-class voters out in the Midwest who traditionally voted Democratic because they're working class, I think because of the demographic shift in the Democratic Party, those people were no longer as important, and they were kind of ignored. I think now they're realizing that, and I think they have a good opportunity to reverse some of the damage, and I think the Republicans are going to help them do that at every step of the way as far as making bad decisions and driving the country in the wrong direction. I think a lot of those people will come back to the Democratic Party.
I think it's a situation where it's going to be the same way when you take a look at like Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, and Michigan. It's going to be the same way as how Obama won Indiana and North Carolina in 2008, and the Republicans in 2012 were kind of like, okay, come home. And they did. So it's probably not a situation where Trump's going to win those states twice. But Ramsey, you bring up some really good points, and I was guilty during the election of basing too much on the demographics of the Obama coalition. And as Trump was winning working class whites the way he was, I was kind of like, well, demographics of the country mean we don't really need them, so whatever. And we were definitely wrong. And Chad, you come from a Rust Belt state in Ohio. What did we do wrong out there?
Yeah, I really think it does come down to Hillary Clinton and just how much she's hated by a particular kind of person. Yeah, I am from the Rust Belt. I grew up in a white working class neighborhood. In the last 5-10 years, I've had jobs where I've worked alongside, managed what members of the white working class, as they're called now. And I can tell you that, yeah, economic concerns are there, and what we've seen happen to the opioid epidemic is real, but racism is a serious component of it. And I'm not sure if we can get a large swath of those people back. I just don't think we fish from the same pond. I think what Trump has opened, I don't think you can put that toothpaste back in the tube. It used to be Ronald Reagan, right? He kicked off his re-election campaign in '84 going to a place called Philadelphia, Mississippi. And it was really only known for a place where some civil rights workers were killed back in the 60s trying to register people to vote. And it was sort of a dog whistle, right? Just a way to get a signal out to a certain kind of voter. And Trump's, the dog is barking, right? He's just racism straight out, unplugged, unvarnished. And the people love it. When you see, I've seen more Confederate flags probably around Ohio in my lifetime, in the last 6 months than I ever have. And I've seen a lot around here, believe me, which is strange being a northern state. But I just don't think you can put this back in the bottle. And, even if Trump does lose, which we all, hope he does in 4 years, there's a market out there, right? Another politician, a Ted Cruz, someone else is going to come along and appeal, I think, with that sort of nakedly racist, xenophobic language.
Well, it kind of seems like it was kind of hushed up for a while among people. And with Trump, people kind of had an outlet. They kind of saw, okay, the door's open. We can kind of, let it out a little more, kind of show our true colors a little more. But, Trump has really excited the Democratic base, and I touched on that earlier. Ramsey, what do you think the prospects are for the Democratic Party next year, seeing the trajectory of Trump at this point?
Oh, I think they're pretty good. I don't think 2 years from now they're going to take over Congress and the Senate. Maybe they'll get one, but I don't think that's where it's going. I think they'll make gains, and I think that's just a pretty statistically safe thing to say. But I think the Republicans just generally don't help themselves on a pretty regular basis. So I think the Democrats have that working for them at least. But I think I'm concerned that that's not. I mean, the Republicans being kind of not fixing Obamacare. I mean, basically not being able to pass a health care law because they couldn't agree on how bad they wanted to make the law. I mean, that was essentially what just happened. And, I think that really goes to show the lack of vision or leadership in that party. I mean, I think if they had been smart, they would have figured out a way to come up with a law that Democrats would have voted for. Because I think there was a lot of issues that could have been fixed in the Affordable Care Act that everyone would have been happy to vote for. Or a majority of Congress, including Democrats, would have been happy to vote for. And they were not interested in getting any Democratic votes. So, I think the Republicans will keep doing damage to themselves. Trump obviously will not stop. I mean, God, it's like he's even appointed people to work with him who also will cause, unforced errors. So, I mean, all that's working in favor of the Democrats. But I get concerned that the Democrats aren't necessarily fixing a lot of the things that they need to fix. I mean, I kind of, you pointed out, Chad, that a lot of racism came out in this last election, and that was absolutely true. But one of the things that kind of sort of I wondered about is how did all those people who are supposedly racist vote for Barack Obama in the last two elections?
Yeah.
That's why, I mean, maybe you being from out there, maybe you have more insight into it. But I mean, I couldn't subscribe to the idea that this was all just racism driving this election. I thought it was some of it. I mean, it was clear that lots of racists and bigots came out of the woodwork, but I don't feel like those people are lost causes necessarily.
Well, I think the longer that, hard economic times go on, the more prejudice sort of bubbles to the surface. And, we're sort of seeing, we're getting about a generation away from the Reagan Revolution, where what he put in place is finally coming home to roost, right? And when you look through the Rust Belt, you look through some of these cities, just sort of, they really are on their last leg. And if you go back to '08, sort of a gimme election, right? George W. Gump had squandered trillions of dollars, millions of jobs, thousands of lives. We lost New Orleans to high water and snakes. So it was just really set up for a generic Democrat to win. And it was almost like the country had a black friend, right? A cool new black friend on a sitcom. And I think it sort of just brushed over a lot of it was the right place, right time for Barack Obama. Like, would he do well in this environment now? I don't know. So I don't think it's racism, but I think, the Trump voters heard his racism, they heard his sexism, they heard his xenophobia, and, it wasn't a deal breaker. And that's just sort of a distinction without much of a difference to me. So, yeah, I think it plays a larger role than we've ever seen openly.
I think I didn't understand just how much people are hurting in the industrial Midwest. I didn't realize it because we see the numbers for the economic recovery, and you can see that it hasn't touched the manufacturing section like it has other sectors. And when I look at all of Trump's defects and how people were still willing to overlook them to vote for this guy because of his economic promises, it kind of made it hit home for me just how desperate people are in a lot of these states. And it was kind of eye-opening for me because I didn't know. I mean, yeah, I'm from Pennsylvania, but it's the Philadelphia area. I don't really see Western Pennsylvania that much, which is similar to Ohio, and it kind of made it sink in. Now, part of the Democrats' problem in Congress, and it's not the only thing keeping them out of power there, but it's a big factor, is gerrymandering. And Chad, I'll start with you on this. What do you think the prospects are on the state level for the Democrats, and what do you think the chances are of over the next decade being able to overturn that problem?
It's going to be tough. It's going to be real tough. If you look at what President Obama is supposedly going to do next, is his next big move with Attorney General Eric Holder. They're going to start a big initiative against, to fight gerrymandering. So we might see some progress there to get some real, heat on it. But do I see it really getting better in the next 4, 5, 10 years? I really don't. Maybe I'm just cynical, but I don't know. I don't see it getting a whole lot better, unfortunately.
I think that you will not see any movement until after the next census.
Well, yeah, that's what I'm thinking is if, do you think we'd be in a position to have enough state capitals come after the 2020 census to be able to redraw these congressional districts properly? That was what I was getting at. And, yeah, I didn't state it, but, yeah, I mean, that was what I was getting at.
But I actually, maybe I'm just cynical because I worked in 2004 on a statewide initiative. It's called Reform Ohio Now, and it was basically set up to amend Ohio's constitution to put in an independent, governing body to sort of equitably draw the lines, and we got blown out. I mean, we just got our asses handed to us by good government ties, by you name it, Democrats. I mean, we lost across the board here in Ohio, and that was during '05. So it was right after an election like Bush, and still got smoked. So I just think it's one of those things that people in the know care about, but I think the average Joe Sixpack's worrying about whatever Kim Kardashian's tweeting about or whatever's on TV.
Okay. Yeah, Ramsey, what do you think as far as prospects on the state level and getting state legislatures back? Because Democrats are in the worst position they've been in since the 20s. As far as that goes, and do you think there's a prospect of making some gains with that, especially with the fervor that Trump has kicked up?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's absolutely a possibility of making some gains, but I mean, I think Chad's right. It's going to take a while. I mean, it took a while to get into this situation. It's going to take a while to get out of it. I think there's a messaging issue to a certain extent, and I don't know how to get around it. I mean, in the sense that I don't think people appreciate what gerrymandering does, and I think as a result, they really just don't care. I mean, I think Democrats would be served well to highlight the ways government doesn't work for them, and that's an example of it. I think one thing the Democrats could do over the next 2 years is highlight all the times government is not working for people. I mean, it's kind of a Bernie Sanders kind of populist idea, but that's why he was popular with a lot of Democrats, and I think he would have been popular in the general election in places where Hillary was not at all. And I think a lot of that was sort of highlighting the way government bureaucracy has failed people. And that's a great example of it. And it's an easy one to pick out that definitely Democrats, it's an example of bureaucracy Democrats absolutely don't like and would be love to reform. And I think they could do a lot of things like that, especially with the Republicans running everything these days. There's lots of examples of the government not working for people. So, I think that's one thing, one message they should probably run with to a certain extent. I mean, at this point, they don't really get to own it. They don't get to have any of the blame for the current situation of the government. The Republicans own it all. They own the Supreme Court, they own Congress, Senate, the presidency. So the only thing the Democrats can do is basically point out how the government's failing people. Just run with that message.
It's a complete role reversal from 8 years ago. And, you take a look at another problem the Democratic Party has is geography. Trading more and more in large cities, and in blue states where, it's finite as to how much you can get out of it. I mean, it doesn't really matter how many votes you get over the Republicans in a presidential election in California. You're still only getting those electoral votes no matter how big the margin is. So the question I would ask, and let's start with Ramsey on this, do the Democrats need to bring rural voters back into the fold, do you think? Like they used to have in their base?
I think Democrats have to care about rural voters. And I think that's what matters. Whether or not they win over a majority of them probably isn't that important from a demographics point of view, but you got to care about those people. I think that was the mistake the Democrats have made, is they've stopped caring about a lot of parts of the country, just huge swaths of the country. And so, I mean, you got to show that you care. You got to think about those people, you got to pass laws, you got to make a show of it to a certain extent. I don't think Democrats are going to do anything for rural America on a federal level. But I think when they had power, they didn't do themselves any favors. I mean, they was very focused on a lot of issues that really affect urban people. And I'm not saying that they only cared about cities. They thought they were caring about some really important moral issues in our country, economic issues, all kinds of problems. But the reality of it is that a lot of those problems don't have much effect on rural America. And they ignored most of the things that do.
Chad, what do you think as far as, can the Democrats overcome their geographical issues?
Yeah, I don't know. I'm not sure if they can or not. But when it comes to rural voters, I would say that what matters most to them, if you look at polling, if you look at different, just even anecdotal, it's jobs are up there, but then you've got social issues sort of right behind. So can the Democratic Party win these voters back? Sure. If we're willing to abandon our principles and, give up the fight for sensible gun control, give up the fight for a woman's right to choose, stand down on Black Lives Matter. Yeah, sure, we can get these people back, but it's going to cost us.
I was going to say that, I don't think the Democratic Party is going to do any of those things.
Yeah.
I mean, I think I wouldn't want the Democrat. I'd be upset if they did, But, the Democratic Party could ask itself questions like, how do you feel about farm subsidies? Like, how do you feel about subsidizing industries that probably aren't really that popular? I mean, there's things that they could have done that might have helped. that wouldn't necessarily be compromising their core principles. But I mean, that's sort of, there's a certain amount of pragmatism required to be. I mean, that was one of the things I liked about Obama, is he was willing to compromise on some things that he clearly didn't agree with. And I think the Democrats could have done some more of that. But my comment about how I don't think they're going to win back all of rural America, I stand by that. I mean, they might win back some voters enough to stop someone from Trump winning, but I don't think they'll ever win a majority of that part of the country ever again, or at least not in our lifetimes.
It's weird to see today is that the Republican looks like the way the Democratic Party did like 60 years ago. Like, it's complete role reversal from the since the Southern Democrats left the party. And it's like they controlled Congress, the Democrats, for 40 years with that old New Deal coalition, and now that New Deal coalition is Republican, and it's strange to see. I want to get your thoughts on the election of Tom Perez as DNC chair. Chad, let's start with you. What do you think of that move?
Yeah, I was fine with it. He seems like a pretty decent guy. I was okay with Keith Ellison. I think some people in the party had a problem with him, so it could have been a little problematic. But overall, I was okay either way. I'll be honest, I've got a little bit of bitterness left over still from the Hillary-Bernie primary. Still got a little anger over all that. So, when it came down to that, just sort of the Bernie sort of a proxy fight, my partisanship sort of came out, and I was pulling for Perez at the end pretty hard. But overall, I could have went either way.
Okay, and Ramsey, what do you think?
I mean, I like Keith Ellison, but I don't think Perez is bad. From what I know about the guy, he seems like a pretty upstanding Democrat. So and I'm pretty experienced. So I don't feel too bad about it. I think I told you though previously I liked Keith Ellison. I mean, I was rooting for him, but I'll take what I can get. I think there are bigger problems. I'm really happy that they replaced the leadership in general. I mean, I don't think you had to be a Bernie supporter to think the Democratic leadership was pretty incompetent in this last election. So, and I mean, as a Bernie supporter, of course, I thought they were, almost corrupt. But that's, I think a new leadership is a good thing, and I think the Tom Perez seems fine to me. I don't have too much issues with that. Time will tell, but, I'm curious to see what sort of initiatives he proposes as far as, turning the party around for 2 years from now and 4 years from now. And I think the expectations he sets are going to be really important. I think if he sets some expectation that like the Democrats are going to win back the House and Senate in the next election, like I'm probably going to instantly not like him or not trust him, because that's pretty unbelievable. So we'll see what he says. I'm going to give him some time here.
I think he set a good tone early. I think he's been aggressive towards Trump. He's kind of built on firing up the base, and it's as much. Yeah, I see what you're saying about the unrealistic expectations, Ramsey. But a lot of times, the party chair, their job is to pump up the base and to do that. So I wouldn't say I'd necessarily distrust him if he said something like that. Although I wouldn't believe him, I wouldn't really believe that he truly believed it. But just like a cheerleader's gonna go when their team's down 30.
I just can't forgive that though. I can't. I mean, come on, man. Like, we're not that stupid. Viable plan, you would lay out a viable outcome. And right now, it's really important that you have a viable plan. You can't just be pumping up the base, because that's bullshit. Your base is worthless right now. Your base just lost you an election.
Yeah, true. Okay. Well, yeah, time will tell. One thing I wanted to bring up is the correlations between now and 8 years ago just have continued to build. 8 years ago, we saw the rise in the Republican Party of the Tea Party, and their practice of primarying Republicans who didn't pass an ideological purity test, who they didn't see as pure enough to continue. And that actually lost them seats. Ramsey, you were in the area still. You remember Christine O'Donnell's commercial that started with "I'm not a witch." Did you ever see that, Chad?
That was
Dude,
great.
I was living in Delaware.
That's
I watched
right. You were still down
I
there.
watched that Christine O'Donnell, Chris Coons debate at a local bar in Newark, Delaware, and we were like screaming at Christine O'Donnell on this debate, like just screaming at the TV, drinking beers. We're all in college or grad school at that point. And what we didn't realize is that the back half of the bar had been reserved by Christine O'Donnell's campaign for like her after debate like celebration party. So we were just like screaming at Christine O'Donnell, and the whole time these like Republican Tea Partiers were like watching us from the back room, like really like awkwardly holding their drink. It was great. It was one of the best political moments of my life.
Oh yeah, yeah. I mean that was great. We saw that commercial dozens of times here. But you have now Rise on the left. So one example would be a new PAC that's been formed by former Bernie Sanders campaign staff. Their site is wewillreplaceyou.org, which is talking about bringing in primary challengers to Democrats that they don't see as progressive enough. And you also have the rise of the Justice Democrats. That's under the host of the Young Turks. Ramsey, I'll start with you. Do you think this is something that in some ways could help the Democratic Party, or is it mostly counterproductive?
I think there are probably situations where it can help. I think there are probably elements of the Democratic Party that, you know, are not good politicians. There's bad politicians on both sides of the aisle. But I think generally, ideologically, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense. I mean, I certainly wouldn't be sending my money to challenge Democrats in the primary. I don't think there's much. If there's a candidate that I really like, I might consider donating to them. But the idea of just generally throwing money at trying to throw out Democrats that doesn't seem very productive. And, you know, I guess I've always lived in places where the idea of a Democrat winning was pretty uncommon in local elections. I mean, I have never lived in a big city, so I guess here in Vermont it's a little bit different. Democrats do win elections up here, but you know, living outside of Philadelphia in the western suburbs, Democrats never won our local elections, and oftentimes didn't win our state elections, and didn't win even our congressmen that we're sending to Washington. So, you know, my biggest concern is beating those people. I mean, I just don't see the point of going to a place that's clearly very solid. The only place that they're going to challenge Democrats is where they're solidly Democratic. I just don't see what the point of throwing money at those places is. It totally goes against what I was saying about worrying about the rest of America. You're literally just going to be pumping more money into city elections. That's what we're talking about here. I mean, that's the only place where Democrats are going to win, like guaranteed. So what, you know, I'm not sure what they're going for.
That brings up an issue where one of the targets of these groups, among others, is Joe Manchin down in West Virginia. And
that's crazy. Why would you do it?
Well, yeah, exactly. I mean, if you hold somebody up to the kind of purity test that you would primary Joe Manchin in, you're just handing a seat back to the Republicans.
Yeah,
because,
absolutely.
I mean, a far-left liberal's not winning in West Virginia. And you take a look at the blue states, the ones that we could truly call blue, I would say there are 13 of them where a far-left candidate will win every time, and you could have two from that state at all times. And that's only 26 Senate seats. So, you know, where are the rest of the votes going to come from? You're going to need them from red and purple states.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, that being said, I don't support primarying Democrats, but I think, you know, pressuring Democrats to take certain policy stances, there's value in doing that. I think they should. But I think, you know, straight up trying to put another candidate in the election is dangerous. You know, oh gosh, what's his name? Remember he had all the Republicans sign a pledge. Was it gosh, I wish I could remember his name now.
What are you talking about? The tax pledge?
Yeah, Grover was it?
Norquist.
Yeah, Norquist. Yeah, I mean, that was pretty brilliant on his part, and you know, for accomplishing what he wanted to accomplish. I mean, I don't agree with the policy, but I mean the the technique that he used was pretty clever and it worked really well. I think there are things like that Democrats who feel the Democratic Party isn't representing them enough in a liberal sense, that's the kind of stuff you could do. And I don't think it's necessarily counterproductive. You might not agree with it as a more moderate Democrat, but I think that's a constructive thing to try to do. So yeah, I think that answers what you're asking, really.
Yeah. No, exactly. And, my whole thing would be I would be upset if they came in and were destructive with it, especially with areas where moderates are your only viable option for winning. But yeah, your point about, kind of pushing elected officials, I like that one. Chad, what are your thoughts on this new movement?
Yeah, I think I sort of look at it I separate it. So on the one hand, you've got people like Tulsi Gabbard. I think it's how you say her name, right? So you got someone from a very liberal part of the country, very liberal district, but she's very got a strange history on guns. She's out there saying we don't know if Assad is responsible for the chemical attacks. She's plays a little too close to the Republicans on some of these things. So you primary someone like that, not such a big deal. But then maybe you come to a place, the Rust Belt or the Midwest, and there's sort of a guy who wants to help out or gal wants to help out and sort of tries to play to the center a little bit. That's one thing. But I would take exception a little bit with Joe Manchin. I think he's sort of on the other end of that, where I think he's very counterproductive. I mean, the organizational vote is important in the beginning, for a leader, but look at us on strategy. Where has he helped us lately? When it came to the Gorsuch vote, he was one of the first people out there saying he's going to vote for cloture. He's sort of the go-to the Republicans can point to and say, "Oh, see, it's bipartisan," right? Because we got Joe Manchin.
Well, yeah, and a lot of he falls in with a lot of politicians where, and Heidi Heitkamp in North Dakota's kind of in the same position, and you've got 10 Democratic senators from Trump states up this next year.
The map is terrible, and Heidi Heitkamp is a pretty good example. They vote sort of similarly, but the way she goes about it, right? It seems like it matters to her to be a Democrat, whereas to him it just sort of seems like a cheap, way to just score cheap points.
Yeah, absolutely. And my buddy, he lives down in Jacksonville. He's moved up pretty well in the Florida Democratic Party, and he, at one point, the president of the Florida Young Democrats was going to join PETA in a protest outside of Bill Nelson's office, and he called the head of the state party. He's like, "You got to put a lid on this. Like, this is insane." First of all, you don't protest a fellow Democrat, a sitting Democratic senator. That's ridiculously stupid. But also, he made the point, Bill Nelson has to be down the middle because of how much red there is in Florida. Like, you've got a lot of these Democrats in these red and purple states who don't have a choice but to vote the way they vote. I mean, does Joe Manchin really have a choice on some of these issues? Like, Joe Manchin's not going to vote on regulations for the coal industry. I mean, unless he's looking to retire and wants to lose re-election, then it would be a great idea. But some of these guys have their hands tied.
But then you look at a place like Ohio, pretty similar to culturally and to some places in Pennsylvania, West Virginia, that part of the country. And you look at Sherrod Brown, right? He's sort of the ultimate progressive champion in the Senate, and he's from a Rust Belt state. That's doable.
It's doable. Yeah, exactly. It's
I think it's really dangerous for people who don't live in these places to be talking about trying to change those elections. I think that's one thing I really feel pretty strongly the Democratic Party needs to be careful about. It's one thing to support your political party across the country. It's one thing to help fund the elections or help fund campaigns. I kind of get that, okay? But when you start trying to impose candidates on a group of people in another part of the country because you think that they're more, ideologically the right candidate, I think that's where you start to get a little bit iffy. I'm all for free and fair elections, and I think we should make sure that candidates are able to all get their messages out there to their constituents and have those constituents vote with an educated opinion. But I think it's really, really dangerous if we're saying things like, oh, this guy's not left enough, so we're going to pour in a bunch of money and find some guy who lives in the state to run against him. I think that's reckless, and I think that's the kind of stuff that screws you in future elections. I think that's where the Republicans and that's how the Tea Partiers screwed Republicans, is doing that kind of stuff.
Right. Well, I would say I would love to have I'd love to get screwed at the ballot box the way the Republicans did, right, in 2010, 2014. So I think there is something to be said for their strategy. But I agree. If you take Bernie Sanders and bring him down to the hollers of West Virginia, it's probably not going to end well, right? Him against Joe Manchin or Shirley, someone down there. But I think that there's an opening for people like Sherrod Brown, right? I mean, Columbus is not San Francisco, and he's in the Senate. He's pretty popular. He's pretty effective.
You get the right candidate, you can do it. Absolutely. I think with the Republicans, they didn't look long term. They turned the Tea Party loose, and it cost them seats. Like, they would have had that Senate seat in Delaware. You had Mike Castle, who was a very popular moderate Republican congressman, running, and he lost in the primaries. That was an easy pickup for the Republicans if they had nominated Mike Castle instead of Christine O'Donnell. You take a look at Missouri in 2012. Claire McCaskill was dead in the water. She was done. And then Todd Aiken did his little legitimate rape comment. And I've seen people self-destruct in politics since I started following it, but I've never seen that kind of turn on a dime meltdown like you saw with that one. But in the end, the Tea Party cost them seats. And starting in 2014, the Republicans were able to put a pin in them finally. So do we have a tough balancing act here with the Democratic Party of learning from the mistake of the Tea Party with the Republicans and maybe, not letting it get out of control? Or could that cause more destruction if we try to I'm not trying to say put a lid on this progressive movement, but just try and keep it under control so it doesn't spiral like the Tea Party movement did. Chad, what do you think? Is there any way to balance those two elements?
Yeah, well, I don't know. I hope so. I mean, I just think that the sort of progressive side needs to be a little strategic with it, going after people where, Democrats going to get elected to that seat one way or the other. So maybe we could have a middle of the road sort of corporate style, or could have a more fiercely progressive. Yeah, I agree. Most places, your Heidi Hyde camps of the world, your Claire McCaskills, these kinds of people, they should have a little bit of leeway, but it's just sort of the way they go about it, right? Even in Evan Bayh, for example, remember Evan Bayh back in the day, he didn't always vote with the party, but when you look at how he went about things in the media, he was sort of a team player. You look at Joe Manchin, right? He's said lately that the Democrat strategy to oppose Trump is bullshit. Well, no, it's not. We're trying to stop fascism, right? That's not bullshit to me. It just seems that the way he goes about it, it's not just enough that he says, hey, I'm conservative. It's, hey, secretly, screw the Democrats too. I'm with you, but my grandpa's a Democrat or something, so I still am. I just think it's a sort of, he's in any case.
He's an example. Yeah, okay, yeah, that's true. He's an example. He's kind of going towards ideologically Zell Miller territory. He's almost like one of the old Dixiecrats.
Yeah. Who
was kind of a relic in the late 90s, early 2000s. Yeah, absolutely. Ramsey, what do you think? Can we balance the future, like the movement forward of the party with the bases, with progressive?
I don't think you have to worry about Democrats getting primaried if the progressive part of the Democratic Party feels like it has a voice in the party. I mean, it was really, really clear in that last election that Bernie Sanders' camp was generally pushed aside for most of that primary. I mean, it was obvious, and and emails eventually showed it, but it was painfully obvious to anybody watching the election that they were just being dismissed and their opinions generally were being ignored. I think if they don't do that, if the Democratic leadership says, okay, Bernie, you can sit at the table, you don't get to say everything, but, we'll listen to you sometimes. I think that would probably work really well. I think they don't have to worry about anything. I think they'll have a united party. I'm not that concerned about party unity, actually, at this point, because I think Bernie certainly doesn't feel like he needs to split the party in half. I think he sees a lot of opportunities for him to, spread the good word, if you will. And he's trying to do that stuff. But he's been in Congress and the Senate for a really, really long time. He's worked with Democrats a lot. He is perfectly comfortable towing the party line and working with Democrats. Occasionally he'll tell them, I don't agree with you. But he's willing to play the game. If the Democrats are willing to play the game, I think most other sort of very progressive Democrats will also follow his lead. Elizabeth Warren's another great example. I think she'd be very happy to follow the lead of the Democratic Party if she gets to be heard occasionally. They're both pragmatic, and I think a lot of progressives are.
I think the party as a whole, by the time you hit the convention, I think the platform kind of reflected this, is a lot in the party. Now, the upper leadership may not have gotten the memo yet, but I think a lot in the party were realizing your point there, Ramsey, of bringing the progressives into the fold by the time you got to convention. I think they saw the mistake that was being made. Was the party making progress toward that as, things went on and as we were getting towards the general election?
No, actually they weren't. Ironically, if the convention's when they started doing that, it's also when they stopped. Because, as soon as the general election started, why would the Democratic Party want to go any further left? Especially against Trump. They just couldn't afford to go more liberal. So that's why they didn't do it. There were certain populist ideas that Bernie was talking about that they probably should have run with. And I think they did to a certain extent. Hillary did kind of pick up the whole, let's reduce the cost of college education for people. Not quite to the extent Bernie was proposing, but, she was trying to meet the progressives somewhere. I guess you can point to that. But no, I think what was more critical is they start doing it earlier in the election. I think the Democrats kind of missed an opportunity to have a unified platform earlier in the primary. And I think that's because they fought Bernie so hard. They just refused to. They refused to acknowledge the idea that any of Bernie's ideas could possibly appeal to the middle, or even the Trump Democrats, right? That obviously nobody knew they existed at that point, but they refused to believe that somehow Bernie's ideas would appeal to anybody outside the ultra left. And I think that was their mistake. I think there was ideas there that actually did appeal to a lot more people. And I think they could have done better to listen to Bernie and try to sort of talk about his ideas more. And I don't think you can blame Bernie for any of that. I really think Democrats do themselves a disservice by saying, oh, Bernie distracted everybody from Hillary during the primary. That was what was being said, and I think that was a huge... If you still think that as a Democrat, get the frick out of the party, man. You just don't get it. You still don't get it if that's the way you're thinking. And there are people who are thinking that way. He represented a huge portion of the Democratic Party. Whether you want to admit it or not, he did. He didn't win the primary, but a lot of Democrats voted for him. So you just can't ignore the things he was saying. And if they don't do that again, if they manage to sort of bring some unity early in the primaries, it won't be a very exciting primary, but it might be a much more exciting general election for the Democrats.
Chad, what are your thoughts on the points Ramsey's making?
I would disagree with that a little bit. I think that Hillary made. Look at Hillary in 2008, right? How she came together behind Barack Obama, right? We didn't have to have a big platform. We didn't have a laundry list of things that Obama had to sign on for to get her endorsement. It was very full-throated. She used every chance she could at the convention to sort of push his candidacy. Whereas when you look at what what Sanders did. He did the roll call. He stretched it out basically as long as he possibly could. And there's obviously a role for spirited debate, and I think open primary is, basically a healthy thing. But when going on as long as he did past the point of mathematical elimination and just, I'm still a little pissed about Bernie with all that. But, do I think some of his, I will agree with Ramsey that some in the party, I think myself included to a certain extent, looked at some of his issues and thought, only the far left will, and I consider myself far left on most things. I think, only the far left's going to like that. Like college campuses are going to like that. But I think there's definitely some appeal, certainly on trade. I missed the boat on that. I think Hillary obviously missed the boat on that.
If you're worried about finding jobs for people, look, man, the coal industry isn't coming back. Like, you want to talk about doing something for the coal industry? Like, that's a great example of a huge, the coal industry, people who are in the coal, they voted for Trump. They did not vote for Hillary.
Hillary proposed that, that giant sweeping program of retraining, of, tax credits, etc. Is that going to happen? Is it really going to be effective? Probably not. But she was out there. At least she had a plan. I don't, some coal miners not going to want to go to community college and, learn how to do. These people are set in their way.
I don't agree. No, I think you're completely wrong, man. I think you're selling these people short. This idea that they don't want to earn a living, they don't want to get more qualified. They do want to go back to get more training. They want good paying jobs. And if you say to them, look, the coal industry's not coming back, even if they're not willing to admit it now, they would have figured it out eventually. They let Trump lie to them about the coal industry coming back, which it won't. It just doesn't make any financial sense for any coal company to start mining more coal. And it doesn't matter how much you relax regulations.
Right.
I think people would have come around to that, and I think they did Hillary Clinton was just, in so many ways, every time she had a good message, people were distracted by something else. And Trump did a really good job of highlighting all the things that people could potentially not like about Hillary, and most of it was bullshit. That woman was crucified over and over again for no good reason. I didn't vote for her in the primary, but I recognized that she was a strong candidate. And it sucks because you're right, she did have that program to propose more training. That was one of the things that she kind of pulled from Bernie. And it was a good idea, but the messaging on it just did not work out well. I think people just didn't even realize that was one of the things she was talking about doing. I don't know how that happened, but it did happen. I remember hearing about it because I was paying a lot of attention to the election. But in general, I don't remember people talking about it much.
Yeah. But no, as far as what I meant about retraining, not so much that they're lazy or they don't want to work. I think what they don't want is just sort of a placeholder job or job making, half as much as they were in some cases, a coal miner on a factory floor, leadership, something like that. I think what that part of the country is really looking for is sort of a pathway again, in the 1950s where, hey, you graduate high school, that's fine. You can get a job, support your family, your wife stays at home, the kids, vacations, 2 cars, etc. And that's what's really not coming back. But as long as there's sort of a glimmer of hope of that, there's too many people holding out for that, I think. And that's why maybe some of this retraining is not as successful as, as it could be or should be.
I remember in 2008, as the primaries were winding down, Howard Feynman on MSNBC, he was talking about how Clinton's camp kept saying, Obama swept Virginia, Maryland, and D.C., how the Clinton camp kept saying, oh, well, it's not over, it's not over. And he was like, really, it was. And when you take a look at these current primaries, I think, we can talk about how much the DNC, treated Bernie and all that, but I think Bernie could go back and tell himself one thing before the primary started. I think he would tell himself, campaign in the South. Because essentially after that first Super Tuesday, in a whole section of the country, he basically rode off. He let Hillary Clinton jump out to a 300 delegate lead that he never really came close to making up. And as much as we can, and he made it competitive for the rest of it, but if Hillary Clinton had said won Florida and Texas, 55-45 or 53-47 rather than 67-33, you could have been looking at a much different dynamic than what you had going into it. I mean, Hillary Clinton thought she was out to an insurmountable lead after that, and she was right. She was. Do you think it was all the DNC, or were there some things Bernie could have done better in that campaign? Ramsey, what do you think?
I don't think Bernie had the money at the time. I mean, I think early on he didn't really have the money to compete. I think by the time his campaign was strong enough to compete, it was too late. I think, it's part of why, and you can say it's irrational. I have such a deep, frustration with the Democratic Party, though, because I think it would have done them a service to let all Democrats' opinions be heard as much as possible by everybody who was voting in Democratic primaries. I don't know why you wouldn't want to do that.
Well, just for clarification, in what sense?
I think the Democratic Party does very little to encourage sort of equal competition amongst Democrats in the primaries. I don't think they'd really do anything besides supposedly have presidential debates, right? And, as far as a funding situation or getting the word out or making awareness to other Democrats, I think there was a lot of people high up in the Democratic Party who were doing a lot of things in favor of Hillary Clinton. And I don't know why they did that. I just don't get it. It doesn't really make sense. I think if I was the Democratic Party, or if I was running the Democratic Party, that would be something that I would try to do, is to make sure that there was a very healthy competition amongst all my primary candidates. Early on, at the very least. And it kind of conflicts with what I was saying earlier about trying to get ahead with party unity early, as early in the primaries as you can. But I think people who are voting have to trust that it's a fair vote, and they have to feel like they're actually hearing all the candidates. I don't know. That was sort of how I felt. I just felt like it was constantly being presumed that Bernie was going to lose. And it meant it was a huge distraction from the things Bernie was talking about. And I think that's sort of where I'm getting at it. It's not so much that I think they should, not try to get party unity, not try to get consensus, but they need to make it so that the discussion isn't, is it a foregone conclusion that one of your candidates is going to lose, but more a discussion of what are the issues these candidates are talking about and who has the good ideas and who has the bad ideas. I thought there was a big distraction very early in the election about why is Bernie even running? Will he even make it in the debate? Will he even get 5% of the vote? It was this constant, kind of, a lot of times, a lot of the coverage early on was Bernie's not getting covered enough, right? All of this discussion about whether Bernie was going to lose, not going to lose, whether he's being covered enough, not covered enough, was a complete distraction from what we should have been talking about the whole time about which candidate had better ideas. That's something that kind of bugged me about that primary.
Chad, what do you think?
Yeah, I would just say about Hillary Clinton, sort of the strength of her candidacy. She didn't come out on top because of a few staffers that nobody's heard of who work at a building in D.C. most people have never been to or would recognize. She won because of the sort of structural advantages she has. She and her husband, who was a former president of the United States, right? She knows every Democrat in the country, right? For the most part, every, decision maker, every big shot outside Philadelphia, every guy who's on a city council and outside Milwaukee, every woman who's, running some city group in Phoenix, whatever. She has built a life around organizing Democrats, around meeting.
Exactly. I mean,
she planning for this, so I don't think it's one
staff. Campaign 3 years ago. I mean, she started their campaign practically right after the last election.
She really started right when in 2000, right? If you can look at the Senate, first Senate race is sort of the first stepping stone. You can see very clearly how she mapped all this out, and she's also very popular Remember that meme that was going around, what, 2006, 7, of Hillary looking at her phone, the old BlackBerry with the dial, and she's got the glasses on. She's sitting in some sort of military plane, text from Hillary or something. She was so cool, right? Everyone loved her, and it was that's sort of, the high point, I think, for Hillary. And then, of course, the campaign started up. It was funny. Every time she was running for office, her numbers were down. But every time she was sort of in office, everyone loved her performance and loved her. But, yeah, I always thought that was strange.
Well, guys, in conclusion, I'm going to ask you both, how should Democrats feel about the future, and should the party be optimistic from here? Chad, why don't you go ahead first?
Sure. Well, I think we should be cautiously optimistic in the short term. We're very good, I think, as a minority party. We're very good, in the opposition. We can be, right. It sort of helps paper over the differences between some of our factions. And Trump, in a lot of ways, the damage to the Republican side. He's sort of the gift that keeps on giving. I mean, we've got a billionaire who lives in a gold tower talking about cutting Meals on Wheels. I mean, these ads write themselves, right?
Yeah. I mean, I think I'm pretty optimistic on the long scale. On the long term, I think for the next maybe 2 years out, it's a little iffy. I think the next presidential election, I'm very optimistic about. I think in the short term, my big concern, I think Democrats have to be concerned about just how much damage the Republicans and Trump are going to do. I think Obama got through a fair amount of good reforms during his presidency. I think he generally did a pretty good job. There was a few issues he didn't touch. There was a few decisions I didn't agree with, but in general, he did a reasonable job of pushing his agenda and what is ostensibly the Democratic agenda forward. I think Trump and the Republicans are going to do just about everything they can to roll back as much of that as they can. I think the Democrats should be very encouraged by the fact that this whole healthcare reform thing completely collapsed. I think that's a good omen for Democrats in the short term. But I think that's what that's what I'm concerned about as a Democrat, is how much damage are they going to do? How much time is the next Democratic president in Congress or Senate going to have to spend fixing all of that stuff? I feel like we've moved forward for the last 8 years, and we're very, very quickly rolling back to George W. Bush, and maybe even further than that. And that's what I'm concerned about, is that even if the Democrats do come back in 4 years, how much work are they going to have to do? It could be a complete mess.
Absolutely. Well, thank you guys. Thank you, Ramsey. Thank you, Chad. That's all the time we've got for this episode. Make sure to follow us on Facebook. You can follow us on Twitter at FullSpectrum17. And make sure to visit our blog, fullspectrumchannel.blogspot.com. Absolutely join the discussion. We'd love to hear what you have to say. And until next time, thanks for watching The Full Spectrum. All right, guys. Thanks a lot. Yeah, that was a good discussion. I was hoping.
America.